1980s horror movies remind us that facing our fears is not only terrifying, but also exhilarating, and that sometimes the most monstrous things come from within. The 1980s was a decade that saw an explosion in the horror film genre. Many iconic films that are still popular today were produced during this era. From the slasher flicks that dominated the box office to the supernatural and psychological thrillers that left audiences on edge, the 1980s was a time of creativity and innovation in the horror genre. In this essay, we will examine the impact of several horror films from this era, including A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, A Dream Warriors, Children of the Corn, Christine, and The Hitcher. Through analyzing the themes, techniques, and reception of these films, we will explore why the 1980s remains a pivotal period in the history of horror cinema. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors is a significant entry in the horror genre of the 1980s, not only because it continued the story of the iconic villain Freddy Krueger, but also because it took the franchise in a new and imaginative direction. This film marked a shift in the series towards a more action-packed and comedic tone while still maintaining its horror roots. The film picks up a few years after the events of the first film, with the character Nancy Thompson returning to help a group of teenagers who are being tormented by Freddy Krueger in their dreams. Unlike the previous two films, Dream Warriors introduces the idea of dream powers, in which each of the teenagers has unique abilities that they can harness within their dreams to fight against Freddy.
Breaking TV! Welcome to prime time, bitch!
film's strengths lie in its imaginative dream sequences and its well-developed characters, including the troubled and vulnerable hare-hound, Kristen Parker. The use of practical effects to create Freddy's grotesque and terrifying forms also adds to the film's visual appeal. Director Chuck Russell and co-writer Frank Darabont, who went on to create the television adaptation of The Walking Dead, brought a fresh perspective to the franchise, blending elements of fantasy, action, and humor in a way that had not been seen before in the horror genre. Additionally, the film's theme song Dream Warriors by the band Dokken became an instant classic, solidifying the film's place in pop culture history. Overall, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors is a standout film in the horror genre of the 1980s, not only for its continuation of the iconic Freddy Krueger character, but also for its imaginative and entertaining approach to horror storytelling. Children of the Corn is a horror film that was released in 1984, based on the short story of the same name by Stephen King. The film was directed by Fritz Kirsch and produced by Donald Borkers, and starred Peter Horton and Linda Hamilton. The film tells the story of a couple who get lost in rural Nebraska and stumble upon a small town where all the adults have been murdered by a cult of children who worship a demonic entity known as He Who Walks Behind the Rose. The film opens with a prologue that sets the stage for the horror to come. We see a group of children in the small town of Gatlin, Nebraska, who are led by a boy named Isaac. Isaac has convinced the children that all the adults in town are evil and need to be sacrificed to appease He Who Walks Behind the Rose. The children, armed with farming tools and other weapons, go on a rampage and murder all the adults in town. The prologue ends with the words, "And the children shall lead them," scrawled on a church wall. The main story begins with a couple, Bert and Vicky, driving through rural Nebraska on their way to Seattle. They get lost and end up in Gatlin, where they find the town seemingly abandoned. They eventually stumble upon a gas station where they meet a young boy named Job, who tells them about the cult and warns them to leave town before it's too late. Bert and Vicky ignore Job's warning and continue to explore the town, where they are eventually confronted by the cult. They are chased through the town and eventually taken captive by Isaac and his followers. Isaac plans to sacrifice them to He Who Walks Behind the Rose, but Bert and Vicky manage to escape and fight back against the cult. The film is a classic example of a horror movie that plays on our fears of the unknown and the uncontrollable. The cult of children is presented as a force of evil that is beyond rational explanation. The film also taps into our fears of children, who are typically seen as innocent and vulnerable, but in this case are presented as the embodiment of evil. The film is also notable for its use of imagery and symbolism. The cornfields, which surround the town, are presented as a vast, labyrinthine maze that is both beautiful and terrifying. The rows of corn are also used to represent the order and control that the cult seeks to impose on the world, while he who walks behind the rows is presented as a chaotic force that threatens to destroy everything in its path. Overall, Children of the Corn is a classic horror film that is still remembered and beloved by fans of the genre. It is a film that taps into our deepest fears and anxieties and presents them in a way that is both terrifying and exhilarating. Whether you're a horror fan or not, Children of the Corn is a film that is well worth watching, if only to experience the thrill of being scared out of your wits. Christine is a horror film that was released in 1983 based on the novel of the same name by Stephen King. The film was directed by John Carpenter and starred Keith Gordon, John Stockwell, and Alexandra Paul. The film tells the story of a teenage boy named Arnie Cunningham who buys a vintage Plymouth Fury named Christine, only to discover that the car has a mind of its own and is capable of murder. The film opens with a montage of scenes from the 1950s, the area in which Christine was built. The car is presented as a symbol of American masculinity and consumerism. The scene then shifts to the present day, where we see Arnie, a nerdy teenager who is constantly bullied at school. Arnie is drawn to Christine, which he discovers in a junkyard, and decides to restore the car to its former glory. As Arnie works on the car, he becomes obsessed with it and begins to change. He becomes more confident and aggressive and begins to stand up to his bullies. However, as he becomes more attached to Christine, strange things begin to happen. The car seems to have a mind of its own and is capable of repairing itself and attacking anyone who threatens it. The film is a classic example of a horror film that plays on our fears of the unknown and the uncontrollable. Christine is presented as a force of evil that is beyond rational explanation. The car is not just a machine, but a living entity with a personality of its own. The film also taps into our fears of technology and the power that it can have over us. Christine is not just a car, but a symbol of the dangers of our dependence on technology. The film is also notable for its use of music and imagery. The soundtrack is composed of classic rock songs from the 1950s and 60s, which adds to the nostalgic feel of the film. The film is also shot in a way that is reminiscent of classic horror films from the 1970s, with long tracking shots and close-ups that create a sense of claustrophobia and tension. Overall, Christine is a classic horror film that is still remembered and beloved by fans of the genre. It is a film that taps into our deepest fears and anxieties and presents them in a way that is both terrifying and exhilarating. Whether you're a horror fan or not, Christine is a film that is well worth watching, if only to experience the thrill of being scared out of your wits.
More, baby, before I am through. I wanna be yours, pretty baby, yours and yours alone. I'm here to tell you, honey, that I'm bad to the bone, bad to the bone, bad,
Hitcher is a horror film that was released in 1986, directed by Robert Harmon and starring Rutger Hauer, Thomas Howell, and Jennifer Jason Leigh. The film tells the story of a young man named Jim Halsey who picks up a hitchhiker named John Ryder, only to discover that Ryder is a sadistic killer who is determined to torment and terrorize him. The film opens with a tense and unsettling scene in which Jim picks up Ryder in the middle of the night. Ryder is presented as a mysterious and ominous figure with a cold and calculating demeanor. As the two drive through the desert, Ryder begins to taunt and threaten Jim, and the tension builds to a violent and shocking climax. The film is a classic example of a horror film that plays on our fears of the unknown and the uncontrollable. Ryder is presented as a force of evil that is beyond rational explanation. He's not just a killer, but a symbol of chaos and destruction. The film also taps into our fears of strangers and the dangers of trusting those we don't know. The relationship between Jim and Ryder is central to the film and is presented as a battle of wills between two opposing forces. Jim is presented as a sympathetic character who is caught in a nightmare, while Ryder is presented as a cold and calculating sociopath who enjoys causing pain and suffering. The film is also notable for its use of imagery and symbolism. The desert landscape is presented as a harsh and unforgiving environment, which mirrors the brutal and violent nature of the film. The scene in which Ryder strings the girl up between the trucks is striking, as it represents the lengths that he is willing to go to in order to torment and terrorize Jim. Silver Bullet is a horror film that was released in 1985, directed by Daniel Attias and starring Gary Busey, Everett McGill, and Corey Haim. The film is based on the Stephen King novella Cycle of the Werewolf and tells the story of a small town in Maine that is terrorized by a werewolf. The film is notable for its use of a child protagonist, Marty, who is a young boy confined to a wheelchair. Marty is presented as a vulnerable and sympathetic character who is often dismissed by the adults around him. However, he is also shown to be resourceful and brave and is determined to uncover the truth about the werewolf and stop it from killing again. film is also notable for its use of humor and satire. The town is presented as a stereotypical small town where everyone knows each other's business and gossip is rampant. The humor is used to lighten the mood and provide relief from the tension and horror of the film. The werewolf is presented as a force of evil that is beyond rational explanation. The film plays on our fears of the unknown and the uncontrollable, and presents the werewolf as a symbol of the dangers that lurk in the darkness. The werewolf is also presented as a metaphor for addiction, as the character of Reverend Lowe is revealed to be the werewolf and is shown to be struggling with alcoholism. The film is also notable for its use of special effects. The transformation scenes are particularly impressive and are still considered to be some of the best in horror film history. The film also makes use of practical effects, such as animatronics and prosthetics, which add to the realism of the film. The Blob is a horror film that was released in 1988 by Chuck Russell and starring Kevin Dillon, Shawnee Smith, and Donovan Leitch. The film is a remake of the 1958 film of the same name and tells the story of a small town that is terrorized by a gelatinous, man-eating blob from outer space. The film is notable for its use of practical effects, including a giant animatronic blob that was created using over 30 tons of silicone. The blob is presented as a force of destruction that grows larger and more powerful as it consumes more and more people. The film plays on our fears of the unknown and the uncontrollable, and presents the blob as a symbol of the dangers that lurk in the universe beyond our own planet. The film is also notable for its use of humor and satire. The town is presented as a stereotypical small town with quirky characters and a sense of community that is both endearing and comical. The humor is used to lighten the mood and provide relief from the tension and horror of the film. The relationship between the two main characters, Brian and Meg, is central to the film. Brian is presented as a rebellious outsider who is initially skeptical of the blob's existence, while Meg is presented as a more practical and grounded character who believes in the danger that the blob poses. The two characters form a bond over the course of the film and work together to try and stop the blob from consuming the entire town. The film is also notable for its use of social commentary. The blob is presented as a metaphor for the dangers of nuclear war and environmental destruction, and the film makes a statement about the need for humanity to be responsible and careful in our use of technology and our treatment of the planet.
How come you turned that off?
Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is a slasher film that was released in 1984, directed by Joseph Zito and starring Kimberly Beck, Corey Feldman, and Crispin Glover. The film is the fourth installment in the Friday the 13th series and tells the story of a group of teenagers who are stalked and killed by the resurrected Jason Voorhees. film is notable for its use of gore and violence, which is more graphic and intense than in previous installments. The kills are shown in gruesome detail, and the film does not shy away from showing the aftermath of the violence. The film also makes use of practical effects, such as prosthetics and fake blood, which add to the realism of the film. The film is also notable for its use of humor and satire. The teenage characters are presented as stereotypical slasher film victims who engage in reckless and irresponsible behavior. The humor is used to satirize the conventions of the slasher film genre and to poke fun at the characters and their actions. The character of Jason Voorhees is presented as a force of evil that is beyond rational explanation. The film plays on our fears of the unknown and the uncontrollable, and presents Jason as a symbol of the dangers that lurk in the darkness. Jason is also presented as a metaphor for the dangers of repressed trauma and violence, as his violent actions are linked to the traumatic events of his childhood. The relationship between the two main characters, Trish and Tommy, is central to the film. Trish is presented as a responsible and caring older sister who is determined to protect her younger brother Tommy from the dangers of the world. Tommy is presented as a resourceful and intelligent young boy who is able to use his knowledge of makeup and special effects to trick and defeat Jason. The Howling is a horror film that was released in 1981, directed by Joe Dante and starring Dee Wallace, Patrick Macnee, and Dennis Duggan. The film is based on the novel of the same name by Gary Brandler and tells the story of a television reporter who becomes embroiled in a werewolf cult. The film is notable for its use of practical effects, including prosthetics and animatronics, to create the werewolf transformations. The transformations are shown in graphic detail, and the film does not shy away from showing the horror of the transformation process. The film also uses sound design to heighten the horror, with the werewolf howls being a particularly effective and chilling element. The film is also notable for its use of humor and satire. The werewolf cult is presented as a satirical commentary on the self-help and New Age movements of the 1980s, with the cult leader being a charismatic guru who promises to help people find their inner selves. The humor is used to lighten the mood and provide relief from the tension and horror of the film. The relationship between the two main characters, Karen and Bill, is central to the film. Karen is presented as a strong and independent woman who is determined to uncover the truth about the werewolf cult, while Bill is presented as a supportive and caring partner who helps Karen in her investigation. The two characters form a bond over the course of the film and work together to try and stop the werewolf cult from spreading their curse. The film is also notable for its use of social commentary. The werewolf cult is presented as a metaphor for the dangers of conformity and the loss of individuality. The film makes a statement about the need for individuals to maintain their own identities and resist the pressure to conform to society's expectations. Cujo is a horror film that was released in 1983, directed by Louis Teague and starring Dee Wallace, Danny Pintaro, and Daniel Hugh Kelly. The film is based on the novel of the same name by Stephen King and tells the story of a friendly Saint Bernard dog that becomes infected with rabies and goes on a killing spree. The film is notable for its use of practical effects, particularly in the portrayal of the titular character, Cujo. The dog is portrayed as a fierce and terrifying beast, with the makeup and special effects creating a believable and intimidating presence on screen. The film also uses sound design to heighten the horror, with the growls and barks of Cujo being a particularly effective and chilling element. The film is also notable for its portrayal of the breakdown of the American family. The two main characters, Donna and Tad, are a mother and son who become trapped in their car by Cujo. The film shows how the stress and fear of the situation put a strain on their relationship and how they must work together to survive. The film also touches on themes of guilt and redemption as Donna struggles with her past mistakes and tries to make amends for them. The character of Cujo is presented as a tragic figure, a victim of circumstance who becomes a monster due to forces beyond his control. The film plays on our fear of animals, particularly dogs, and shows how our friendly and loyal pet can become a deadly threat when infected with rabies. The film also touches on themes of animal cruelty, as Cujo's illness is caused by neglect and mistreatment by his owner. The film is also notable for its use of suspense and tension. The majority of the film takes place in and around the car, with Donna and Tad trapped inside while Cujo stalks them. The film uses the confined space to create a sense of claustrophobia, and the tension builds as the characters become increasingly desperate to escape. The film also uses jump scares and sudden shocks to keep the audience on edge. Monster Squad is a horror comedy film that was released in 1987, directed by Fred Decker and starring Andre Garr, Robbie Kiger, and Duncan Regehr. The film follows a group of young friends who must team up to stop classic horror monsters such as Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman from taking over the world. One of the key themes of the film is the power of friendship and teamwork. The main characters are a group of misfits and outcasts who are bullied and ostracized by their peers. However, they come together and form a tight-knit group that is able to overcome their differences and work together to fight the monsters. This theme is presented in a way that is both fun and heartwarming, and it is one of the key reasons why the film has remained popular with audiences over the years.
Patrick,
Way.
hey, we're trying to do the test deal. You're gonna piss him off.
I'm beginning to like this club.
Rudy! Come on, it's a monster test. It's important, okay? Second way to kill a vampire.
The film also uses humor to great effect. The jokes and gags are both clever and silly, and they help to offset the horror elements of the film. The humor is never over the top or forced, and it feels natural and organic within the context of the story. This balance between horror and comedy is one of the reasons why the film has become a cult classic, as it appeals to both horror fans and those who enjoy a good laugh.
You met my friend Horace. You okay?
Rudy,
Shh. You dropped your candy bar, EJ.
It's his.
It's yours now.
Rudy,
Eat,
Rudy, I'm not gonna sit
Eat
here
up.
and eat.
and we'll call it a day.
Another notable aspect of the film is the portrayal of the classic horror monsters. The film presents them in a way that is both faithful to their original incarnations and also fresh and new. The monsters are given a modern twist, and they are presented in a way that is both scary and cool. The film also pays homage to the classic Universal monster films of the 1930s and 1940s, and it does so in a way that is respectful and reverential. The film is also notable for its use of practical effects. The makeup and special effects used to bring the monsters to life are impressive and well done, and they add to the overall sense of terror and excitement in the film. The special effects are not reliant on computer graphics, which gives the film a more tactile and tangible feel. Overall, The Monster Squad is a fun and entertaining film that combines horror and comedy in a way that is both effective and enjoyable. The film has remained popular over the years due to its strong themes of friendship and teamwork, its clever use of humor, and its faithful portrayal of classic horror monsters. If you are looking for a film that will both scare you and make you laugh, The Monster Squad is definitely worth a watch. Day of the Dead is a horror film directed by George Romero and released in 1985. The film is the third installment in Romero's Dead series, following Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Set in a post-apocalyptic world overrun by zombies, the film explores the breakdown of society and the relationships between the surviving humans.
Is there food?
I'm running this monkey farm now, Frankenstein, and I want to know what the fuck you're doing with my time!
Just jerking off.
I'm gonna have my men blow the piss out of those precious specimens of yours, and we're gonna get the hell out of here and leave you and your highfalutin.
One of the key themes of the film
friends
is the
to
tension
rot
between
this thing.
science and militarism. The story takes place in an underground bunker where a group of scientists are studying the zombies in an attempt to find a cure for the epidemic. However, their work is constantly undermined by the military personnel who believe that the only way to deal with the zombies is through force and violence. This conflict between the two factions represents a larger societal issue about the balance between scientific inquiry and militaristic action.
What are you giving him in there, Frankenstein? What is it? What are you giving him?
No, you must listen to me, Captain. You must listen!
Listen to this.
The film also delves into the psychological impact of the apocalypse on the surviving humans. The characters are all dealing with their own traumas and struggles, which are only heightened by the dire circumstances in which they find themselves. The film explores themes of isolation, grief, and fear as the characters struggle to maintain their humanity in the face of overwhelming horror. One of the most memorable aspects of the film is the makeup and special effects used to create the zombies. The zombies in Day of the Dead are some of the most gruesome and horrifying in cinema history, with their rotting flesh and grotesque injuries. The makeup and effects are both impressive and unsettling, adding to the overall sense of terror in the film. Overall, Day of the Dead is a thought-provoking and unsettling horror film that explores themes of science, militarism, and psychology. The film's commentary on societal issues and its expert use of makeup and effects make it a classic of the genre. If you're a fan of horror or science fiction, Day of the Dead is definitely worth a watch. The Dead Zone is a horror film directed by David Cronenberg and released in 1983. The film is based on the novel of the same name by Stephen King and stars Christopher Walken as a man with psychic powers who uses his abilities to try to prevent tragedy. The film explores themes of fate, morality, and the consequences of our actions. Johnny Smith is a school teacher who is involved in a car accident that leaves him in a coma for 5 years. When he wakes up, he discovers that he has developed psychic abilities, including the ability to see into people's pasts and futures. Johnny struggles with the weight of this power as he is forced to confront the moral implications of knowing people's deepest secrets and being able to change their futures.
Accident. Ichabod Crane disappears. The line goes, as he was a bachelor and in nobody's debt, nobody troubled their head about him anymore.
Is that what you're afraid of?
That's what I want.
One of the key themes of the film is the idea of fate and whether or not we can change our destiny. Throughout the film, Johnny is presented with various situations where he can use his powers to alter the future, but he is often conflicted about whether or not he should. The film explores the idea that even with the ability to see into the future, we may still be powerless to change it. The film also deals with the consequences of our actions and the idea of taking responsibility for them. Johnny's psychic powers give him a unique perspective on the people around him, and he is forced to confront the moral implications of what he sees. The film asks the question of whether or not we can truly be held responsible for things that are out of our control, and whether or not we should try to intervene when we have the power to do so. Another notable aspect of the film is the performance of Christopher Walken, who delivers a haunting and nuanced portrayal of Johnny Smith. Walken brings the depth and complexity to the character that makes him sympathetic, even as he grapples with the weight of his powers and the consequences of using them. Overall, The Dead Zone is a thought-provoking and compelling horror film that explores themes of fate, morality, and the consequences of our actions. The film's exploration of these themes, combined with Walken's unforgettable performance, make it a classic of the genre and a must-watch for fans of horror and psychological thrillers. Pumpkinhead is a horror film directed by Stan Winston and released in 1988. The film tells the story of a man who seeks vengeance against a group of teenagers who accidentally killed his son and the consequences of his actions. The film explores themes of revenge, guilt, and the supernatural. Ed Harley is a father who lives in a remote rural area with his son. When a group of teenagers accidentally kills his son, Ed seeks out the help of a local witch to summon a vengeful demon known as Pumpkinhead to seek revenge against those responsible. One of the key themes of the film is the destructive nature of revenge. The film shows how Ed's desire for revenge consumes him and how his actions have unintended consequences that ultimately lead to his own downfall. The film asks the question of whether or not revenge is ever truly justified and whether or not it is worth the cost.
He's gotta run his course now. What did you think? It'd be easy, neat and clean and painless. You're a fool.
If you won't help me, if you don't help me, then I'll do it myself.
The film also explores the theme of guilt and the ways in which we try to cope with it. It is consumed by guilt over his son's death, and his desire for revenge is driven in part by his need to assuage his guilt. The film asks the question of whether or not we can ever truly make amends for our mistakes, and whether or not seeking revenge is a healthy way to cope with guilt. Another notable aspect of the film is the portrayal of Pumpkinhead, the vengeful demon summoned by Ed. The creature is portrayed as a terrifying force of nature with a design that is both eerie and memorable. The film's use of practical effects and creature design is a testament to the skill of director Stan Winston, who was also responsible for the creature effects in films such as Aliens and Jurassic Park. Overall, Pumpkinhead is a thought-provoking and chilling horror film that explores themes of revenge, guilt, and the supernatural. The film's exploration of these themes, combined with its memorable creature design and practical effects, make it a must-watch for fans of horror and dark fantasy.
I'm very disappointed in you. You steal the secret of life and death, and here you are, trysting with the bubble-headed co-ed. You're not even a second-rate scientist.
Ah, Mr. West, I'm actually glad to see you.
Re-Animator is a 1985 horror comedy film directed by Stuart Gordon, based on the H.P. Lovecraft novella Herbert West, Re-Animator. The film follows Herbert West, a medical student who has developed a serum that can bring the dead back to life, and his colleague Dan Kane as they test the serum and the consequences that come with it. One of the key themes of the film is the danger of unchecked ambition. Herbert West is portrayed as a brilliant but morally ambiguous character who is willing to go to extreme lengths to achieve his goals. His obsession with the serum and bringing the dead back to life drives him to disregard ethical boundaries and put others in danger. The film serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the consequences that come with it. Another notable aspect of the film is its use of dark humor. The film balances its horror elements with humor, resulting in a film that is both frightening and entertaining. The humor often comes from the absurdity of the situations that the characters find themselves in, such as a reanimated cat attacking a character, or a headless corpse being controlled by its own disembodied head. The film's use of humor helps to lighten the mood and make it more accessible to a wider audience.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
The film also explores themes of morality and the ethics of science. Herbert West's disregard for ethical boundaries in his quest for scientific discovery raises questions about the limits of scientific experimentation and the role of morality in scientific progress. The film also raises questions about the nature of life and death, and whether or not it is ethical to bring the dead back to life.
No!
Did you see him, Dan? He listened to me. It made a conscious act.
He heard you as an animal would. No, you can't be serious.
The film's special effects and practical makeup are also noteworthy, with several scenes featuring graphic and grotesque imagery that is both disturbing and impressive. The practical effects add to the film's charm and help to create a sense of immersion in the world of the film.
Yes, Doctor. It's Herbert West. What are you thinking? How do you feel?
Overall, Re-Animator is a unique and entertaining horror film that explores themes of ambition, morality, and the ethics of science. Its combination of horror and humor, as well as its impressive special effects and practical makeup, make it a standout film in the horror genre. Killer Klowns from Outer Space is a 1988 horror comedy film directed by the Cujo brothers. The film follows a group of teenagers who encounter a group of alien clowns who have come to Earth to capture and harvest human victims for food. The film is notable for its unique premise and its blend of horror and comedy. One of the key themes of the film is the fear of the unknown. The alien clowns in the film are completely foreign to the human characters, and their appearance and behavior are unsettling and terrifying. The fear of the unknown is a common theme in horror films, and Killer Klowns from Outer Space takes this theme to a new level by introducing a completely alien and bizarre antagonist. The film's use of humor is also noteworthy. While the film is primarily a horror film, it also incorporates a significant amount of comedy. The humor often comes from the absurdity of the situations that the characters find themselves in, such as a clown using a balloon animal to strangle a victim, or a clown using a cotton candy cocoon to capture a victim. The humor helps to balance out the horror elements of the film and makes it more accessible to a wider audience. Another notable aspect of the film is its use of practical effects. The Cujo brothers used practical effects to create the alien clowns and their various weapons and devices. The practical effects add to the film's charm and helped to create a sense of immersion in the world of the film.
Oh, pizza.
The film also explores themes of conformity and rebellion. The alien clowns in the film represent a force of conformity, seeking to capture and consume humans in a uniform and controlled manner. The human characters, on the other hand, represent rebellion and individuality, fighting against the conformity of the alien clowns. This theme is particularly relevant in the 1980s, a decade marked by cultural conformity and a backlash against it.
Can I take a ride, pal? Can I beep the horn? Oh, thank you! Should have let the man ride his bike.
Overall, Killer Klowns from Outer Space is a unique and entertaining horror comedy film that explores themes of fear, conformity, and rebellion. Its blend of horror and comedy, its use of practical effects, and its unique premise make it a standout film in the horror genre. In conclusion, the horror films of the 1980s were a groundbreaking and influential period for the horror genre. This decade saw the emergence of new subgenres, such as the slasher film and the reinvigoration of classic monster movies. The films of this era often explored complex themes, such as guilt, revenge, and the consequences of small-town gossip. They were also known for their inventive death scenes, memorable villains, and suspenseful atmospheres. Overall, the horror films of the 1980s have left a lasting impact on the genre, and their influence can still be felt in contemporary horror films today. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate your time and I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel, liking the video, and sharing it with your friends and family. Your support helps me to continue creating content and sharing my passions with others. It means a lot to me, and I'm grateful for every view, like, and comment. So thank you again, and I hope to see you in future videos.